thank you to everybody. Thank you especially to Sean Ferguson, who invited me and found a way after I was sick in January to reschedule and re-meet all the schedule of everybody. I must say, as you must have noticed, I'm not a Paganini of PowerPoint. So don't expect flash animation or stunning 3D objects from this presentation, but if just it worked, I would already be happy, because I fought against a sound that didn't want to come, still doesn't want to come, and we will not have it. So let me translate the title in a human version, and the idea is for me that synthesis is not just making sounds, thinking in a certain way, and hearing in a certain way. And especially dynamically and hierarchically becoming sensitive to tempo, to why time unfolds on time. And these questions, of course, people who are, let's say, used to writing music with pitch, time and dynamics, classical, and requires another kind of strategy that may be applied also to instrumental music. So we'll actually always a shuttle between instrumental and synthetic music. There is, for just this afternoon, let's say that synthesis is what is generated by a computer, and if there is a sound from outside that is coming, it is either a sound that is processed of a sound that is already synthetic, or it is a sound that is far enough from the original sound that you don't hear the audience. So granular synthesis for doing time stretching will not be synthesis for tonight, just for tonight. From tomorrow, we'll go ahead. We'll see. I say that not because I want to make a role and a law, just because I started with this. And actually, the first piece was that I composed already 25 years ago, and that is the starting point. Was a reflection of what sound is from these three points of view that I mentioned. It's a very large piece, 45 minutes. We'll look at just relatively in detail at some few sections of that. And then, depending on the time that is left and your patience and so on, we will go on very short, rapidly through other pieces. We will just run around them. So this piece is for piano and electronics. So electronics actually a recorded sound with two spaces, a small space around the piano with a loudspeaker under the piano, and a large space around the audience that is inhabited only by the electronics. Where the electronics and the piano meet, of course, in the small place. As you can see, it's a very large thing. There are three movements. Each time I was becoming better and more knowledgeable, because it was my first piece with electronics. With this medium, the second movement would be longer. So the first, second, and third, they are in increasing depth, just not for mystical or structural reasons, just because I was getting more skilled with this technology, and I could afford to think of a form that was larger. So the first idea that I tried to say is that, okay, what does it mean to compose, to synthesize the sound of the piano with the piano, which may be a bit contradictory. And actually, if you think of a staccato piano, a staccato sound piano, followed by a pianissimo forte, followed by a long piano, tenuto piano, slow. And try to combine both of them. So you take the attack of one and the resonance of the other, you get this sound. That can be varied in the colors of the resonance. More or less, well controlled is me who was playing the piano, and I'm a terrible pianist now, 25 years after I stopped playing the piano. So it's very deep. But for a composer, the moment you say there is something I can control, that I can more or less predict, and then it may become a material of composition. I go a bit back. I wanted to jump. The second point is to use the pedal in another way. So to cut a part of the resonance, and the pedal becomes like a high-pass filter, not so easy to control. You have kind of Paganini with the right foot, actually. But nevertheless, you can get quite a lot out of a low resonance. Or a variation of the first example, and we combine it with the second, a resonance that doesn't want to stay in place, pitch-wise, but jumps to one of the harmonics of the sound, with that, of course, have not been played. Maybe we'll say what he's coming from Paris to tell us about C major arpeggio. Even if it is spectral, it's nevertheless a very banal arpeggio. This is very true. If you think in this way, as I say, synthesis as a way of thinking is not a way of doing. It's accessorily a way of doing. You have to do it in order to think, but it's first a way you understand the things. There are two things here. If you push this example, this exploration of sound a bit further, you get to this point and ask you to appreciate the difference between the previous resonances that were either too complex to be separated into a chord, or very simple, you can single out one or two notes aleatorically, or not aleatorically, but I mean, depending on which one you want. And here, what is this resonance? Small harmony. And you actually can continue, and it makes sense. So, so you have more, and the harmony for a musician is a structure. Is a sum of elements that have a certain structure that binds them together and gives a higher structure. How from the same sound is it possible, and that's the point, to get not only single elements or complex elements that are not analyzable, but also an identifiable, characterized element that is this, the resonance. I'm going to say, wonderful. I want to do exactly the same thing at the beginning of the piece. But because I'm a composer, I'm not the Mr. Nature, I would say, so I don't depend on nature. I want to do the same thing, but I want to have this resonance under the sound, not the previous or the C major chord. And I want to do my own harmonic system. Don't borrow the harmonic system from nature to get that. Rimbaud already did it. He did it well. I'm not as good as him, so let me do my own things my own way. The problem is that this very simple conceptual leap in the mind of a composer, let's say, okay, I take this, this is it, fine, wonderful, I get this. Then I go to the other point, it's just not possible. Here starts the problem. Because of course you can trick, if you're a bit experienced with the things, you can find ways that, for example, behind a low sound comes out this resonance. Hear it. But it's super weak on the level of noise level here. It's the only way I found. There is a trick, you probably didn't hear, that is I play the sounds, I play the chord pianissimo masked by the low C, and then the chord resonates when the low C goes away. But I mean, it's not a tool of composition, this, you can do nothing with that. So the point is that I need to have sounds that are resonating in arbitrary, composed resonances. And this is, in the world of nature, not possible. It's not only in the world of nature, but also in the world of the human perception. I'm very sorry, I'm banal and drastic here, but I don't know how. But to put it extremely shortly, perception is stable when the information is coherent and sufficient. If there is too much, it tends to be overloaded or noisy. If there is too little, you can't understand nothing, or you have ambiguous cases. The very well-known examples, of course, of a Necker cube, you don't know if it goes up or down because you're missing the link of what is the forward and backwards, or the double face. That's that you don't know if it is a cup or two faces. Now, I would say it's the same kind of problem that you have to solve in music in like that. For example, when you have a spectrum, this is a spectrum of a low C of the piano. Then in the spectral contour, you may have single harmonics that single out. You have groups of harmonic that have a bump. This is a formant. But the distance between the harmonics is more or less the same as the frequency of the fundamental frequency. Stephen McAdams, that is here present, he analyzed sounds where you dissociate this coherence. You make the sound where the distance between the harmonics is always the same as the fundamental frequency, but then you shift the fundamental frequency, so it is no longer the same, but the distance has not moved. And there you get into, depending on how much you do it, or depending on other circumstances, incoherent perception is fragile. Sounds like this, they may, what do you hear? You hear the fundamental or you hear the distance with your ear? I mean, suppose you have a G, it's 100 hertz. You have all the aperture with 100 hertz. You move over a semitone, you have 110. Do you hear an A or do you hear a G? You have the distance of a G with F0 of an A. Good point, good point. You don't know, it depends on other circumstances. These sounds become fragile, it's very sensitive to the environment. They can absorb elements that come from the neighboring environment. You're getting at a very tricky but very interesting perceptual situation. So I tried very modestly to do more or less the same thing, to take away the information of a sound. A chord is, of course, you see, perfect. A chord is very simply a spectrum with 5 times 1 per note. And you can imagine to reduce this to less and less notes, so that at a certain moment you are left with just the backbone, or the bare bone of the sound, until you lose the contact with the chord. Here is the way it is done. The first is using frequency modulation in a special way. Rather than, there is an article of John Chowning about the simulation of the singing voice that shows that, not with the chords, with the voice. But voices that are very, very formantic sounds, they need pretty good formants to be recognizable. And he, in Phoné, he tried to simulate voices with frequency modulation. And found out that he could use frequency modulation with several with same modulating wave and several carriers, so that each carrier is tuned to a formant of the voice. And found ways of tuning the frequency modulation elements to the carrier to the formant of the voice. I managed to do relatively good things. I want to do the same, but I want to place so I have one F0, and I want to place my formats not on the singing voice, but on the chord, which means acoustically seen absolutely nothing. You get a sound like that. Actually, if the fundamental frequency is relatively high, like in this example, you get a kind of sound like this. You see the formants here very well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Vintage sound, I forgot to say, 1982, digital converters from the University of Padua. It was still 16 bits per 15 kilohertz of sampling rate. And so that's the sound I got, and that's the quality of the sound I was working with. On the other hand, if you use the same system, it's really the same data, but you transpose the fundamental frequency 2 octaves lower, you get into the roughness area of the 10 to 20 hertz. So the fundamental frequency doesn't have a big meaning. You will hear a kind of low rumble, brrr, that's it. And then you have a concentration on the formats. Look here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 formats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 formats of our 5 chords. And you get a sound that loses the fundamental frequency, but that gets closer and closer because in order to keep harmonic sounds, you have to tune the pitches of the formants to the low frequency. So the formats are never absolutely the same, but you get closer and closer to the resonance you had before. This is what you hear are formants. The low F0 is in the cellar. C sharp, you hear it. C. So because the formants have a harmonic meaning, approximate have a harmonic meaning, you oscillate all the time between a fundamental frequency, rugged of course, and a formant area that tends to approximate the chord of the resonance coming of the piano. Of course, with additive synthesis, you can get much more pure in your results, but you can go further in other directions. If you think that additive synthesis as additive filtered noise, I would say, or whatever. Even if you see that each element of the synthesis here, that is of course one note of the chord, this is perfect, has There is an article also of Jean-Claude Risset that mentions how he made, how a bell-like sound can be made more natural if there is a beating added, or two beatings actually of different frequencies added to the low frequencies. If I extend this information and say I have an extreme X amount of added sinus tones offset from the main tone of the spectrum that I can add from 2 to n to as many as there is a cluster potentially of density controllable, then you can act on these two controllers to have a sound that has different varieties. Here is a pure sound. You hear almost like a pure additive synthesis chord with different beatings, very irregular, much more irregular than the Risset's bell where you hear the two beatings. And of course, you saw the low arpeggio going down, so the lowest note then ends at the end. But you can use these beatings as clusters, micro additive clusters. Here is two examples. Same data, I just move these two values. I have recognized the color of the resonance at the beginning, at the end of this sound. And of course, these micro additive clusters, or additive microclusters, if you prefer, as you wish. It's much more interesting, much more controllable. It can develop into arpeggios, melodies, things that a simple filtered noise. Then let's hear just the beginning of the piece, of the tape of the piece, the way it works. The pure sounds. Frequency modulation, rap, a bit like this, additive. And we ended with our last sound that we just heard. So this is a section, it's a formal process, it's a sort of composed thickening of the resonance and then a sudden explosion given by the big additive cluster. You see it very well. I think you hear it also very well. But you remark also that this development of the resonance that is coming from the piano, it is not something that comes from nothing, and we'll hear exactly in the next example, follows different paths. It's quite worked out, much more than what you could do with the pedal. Here is an example with the notation. It's not the same thing, of the end of the piano part solo, which is a sort of final exploration of points with resonances in the time as we saw, and the beginning of the electronics, just a moment where one gives up and the other comes in. Oops, pardon. Was not meant to be played with this kind of noise, but nevertheless, I thought you got the thing.
I'm sorry, but it's an ensemble rehearsal.
Okay, no, I thought it was something with my computer, no. No, but it's fine. Doesn't matter. The points are nevertheless clear. So you see, formally, the piano is a sort of ricercare, like the form at the beginning of the 16th century, where the instruments were searching what an instrument could do, and but not the voice. Sort of ricercare, but in the depth of the resonance. We will go back to this concept better, because I found ways of controlling this element much better than now. What he can do, he can hit a sound, listen, hit a sound, listen, hit a bit more in a more complex way with gesture, different gestures, and create more complex impulses, but nevertheless he's creating an impact of sound and waiting and hoping that there is something back. The fading, fade out is totally unhearable, but I myself don't hear it. So, I mean, and I really try to keep my ears, just don't hear it. Okay, for the CD, so you try to make it the right way. In the concert, sometimes you hear it. And then it develops like this, and then from this wall on, everybody is trying to develop itself in a certain way. There are nevertheless some issues. What does it mean if you think of the material in this way? What does it mean to organize it? How can you control and eventually notate different states of perceptual fusion and segregation of these chords, sounds, timbres, and so on, that actually may become a timbre if they're heard in a concert, and the same sound may become a chord if they heard in another concert. And I must say the work of McAdams about the difference between identification and recognition is very useful for us, because none of our materials can actually be identified. We don't have names of them, categories, but they can be recognized. They can be recognized when they come back, modified, otherwise it's just a quotation, and they can be linked to the original sound or the further sound. This is the principle of primitive material in the computer science and point of view of primitive, not in the natural point of view, and of development in music. That's the way development can start. There are also other issues. That is, me as a composer, how can I do it? How can I imagine forms that fit to this, like what is frequency, time in different times? There are different time scales. Are there the same rules that apply to the different things? Not from the point of view of the psychoacoustic, this we know, or we can read, or we will know, but from the point of view of the composer point of view. Let's say I talked about this proximity with the two pianos. There was, or maybe the major point of the piece. Try to make out of an extremely separated sound wall. There is only a piano with 28 keys and 3 pedals, no preparation, no zero, no transformation, nothing. Then the piano of Chopin, Beethoven, no, even not Chopin. It's a piano from Debussy to nowadays. Just in terms of the size of the instrument and the size of the dynamics. Not to compare myself with them, just to say it's the same instrument. Unfortunately, not the same composer, but that's another point. And for a really classical piano, I wanted to set it up as a challenge, and on the other side there are purely synthetic sounds, roughly additive synthesis and frequency modulation. Well controlled, of course, but they're just it. Two walls that have nothing with each other, acoustically, to do. And how can they manage to dialogue, to communicate, to create moments where they get together to oppose themselves and so on. An expert on the second movement, which is dialogues, shows that. want to go until the end just to leave time for question and other things. So it's clear that the sounds are different, but of course the answer is clear. The musical material is that is the thought, not the sound. Let's go back to the idea that synthesis is a way of thinking and not only a way of making sounds. About it, there is quite a lot of personal biography and so on that you can find on the internet. It gave birth, this system, to a need to notate the music exactly in the computer, the synthetic part, in the way I wanted to think it, and not in the way a synthesizer wanted me to think it. And the final development of the point, there is no real thought, I think, at least for the musician, without a certain kind of writing. You have to be able to organize your things. That is to get free of time and arrange the things away of time. But from the computer point of view, what does it mean? Computers are extremely fast to compute, but not so fast to do morphological operations. And it's we worked quite a lot about that. I don't go into very issues. And the final point is the system that has been released from Earcam since 2000 and is still being developed. It's actually the translation into Lisp and later OpenMusic of my original PLF routines in Csound. And also of OM Chroma, there is quite a lot of reference. The final one, the ultimate one, at least for this part of OM Chroma, will come out soon in the next issue of the Computer Music Journal. Then, this, as I said, it's not only thinking about sound, it's also knowing where the sounds come out from. And imagine that, now we will talk a lot about space in this conference, because it's one of the things that come automatically if you are doing synthesis. You are there, you are in the sound, you have a control of all the data of sound, but why not at that point, instead of making your sound and then put it in space like normally done, why don't, in the moment that you make your sound, put the space also in the sound itself? In Trajectoria, the space in the sound is very easy, very simple. Stereo sounds that are diffused acousmatically with orchestra of loudspeakers, if possible, and then it's but it is specialized from left to right. And the piano, the way it was recorded, you might have noticed it in the CD recording. It's also specialized left to right, as if you were at the place of the pianist when you listen to the piece. So the lows are here, the high are on your right, which you normally don't do if you record Chopin. But although it would be interesting, but it's not accepted. Now, the idea of the space, of course, wandered in many times. The first thing that I managed, if there is one term for a composer, space, he always asks for many times the same thing. I said, no way, you want 1,000 oscillators? Yes, then I want 1,000 times 1,000 oscillators. And you want 3 loudspeakers? Okay, but then I want 300, then 3,000. Then why not 3 million? Why not continue? I don't know, why not a whole 3D sound field? And so it's always, because it's very natural when you compose, you don't think about, of course, always about the electronic complexity, but it's very natural to jump orders of complexity in the scientific world. So the first thing I occupied myself with is the idea of spatial polyphonies. This was in a radio opera, of which I choose a second scene because it's a lullaby, and we go back to another lullaby later. And here the way, there are 8 actors, there are 8 singers, they all sing different things. Each actor is associated to one track or a group of actors with one track with its own time, its own reverb, with its own space. So each voice has its own space, and you have voice is in space that move in a larger space that is not a global reverb as often done when doing the final mixing, but just it is the sum of all of this. Let's hear just a little bit of that.
La mer.
You see, because it is a radio opera, it is an opera. I mean, there is a dramaturgy, there is a libretto, there is things that you find in operas, but there is no scene because it's for the radio. So you see nothing, there is no volume, there are no actors physically present. So I replace the movement of the actors by the combination of moving spaces. So an actor moves in a space that moves, and they both do something. And another way that I mentioned in trajectory was the first time I tried out the resonance of the piano, and it was a very big beginner. But I found 10 years later a possibility of working better, which is using the concept also of my invention of piano d'amore. You have the viola d'amore, but it was some centuries ago. But the principle is the same. You ask 4 people, usually the person who turned the pages, rarely played by heart, luckily, this music. And to borrow 2 hands from him or her, and then you put 4 hands on the piano and you block 10 to 25. This is the largest blockage for this piece. 20 to 25 keys that are blocked by the middle pedal and stay there until the end of the piece. Yeah, the piece, another structure ends. These are complex chords. They are not done for the acoustical reason. They are done especially for the other side of harmonic reasons, because the harmony they don't hear, or they hear only through its effect on the resonances. But by doing this, you get in a very special chord, piano. Let's hear just the beginning of this piece, which is again another lullaby, but very different, where you very clearly hear the lully elements of the oscillating element in a side of half tremolo, very strange, and all the elements that are very loud, that are here in green and red, they are just staccatissimo. So you have a staccatissimo on a piano that is legato, which is normally very difficult to achieve, because either you put the pedal and you legato and then a resonant. If you don't put the pedal, then everybody's dry. You see, if you're a piano, you say there's something wrong with this piano. It's something over there too, because normally you cannot have a staccato and such a complex tenuto at the same time, unless there is a trick, actually. And but the miniature Estrose were for me much more interesting as a formal experiment. And there I invented with the term the cognitive form, but I mean, now it's more developed, but I will not get very much into it. I just say how it works. Each piece has a structure at some way. It depends if it's a lullaby, it'll have this undulating element. If it is a toccata, it will be a toccata character. If it's a passacaglia, it will be a passacaglia. So there is a form, inherent form for the piece. But within this form, for example, in what you just heard, the strong elements, they don't belong really to the form. They are perceived like here, small ornaments, small accessories, let's say, of the form, before the form continues alone. Now, if you play a lot with them, if the piece is full of these accessories, different levels, this was a very big one, there are others that are smaller one, and so on. At a certain moment, you have a continuous form with plenty of, let's say, distraction, of plenty of formal distractions that create a sort of nothing at the piece. It's just a variation or an ornamentation of the major formal path. The same with the other pieces. Of course, if the composer finds a way to compose the distractions so that some are near each other, but in the time across the pieces, so it's not around the pieces. Then, of course, when you are familiar enough with this, that is, when your cognition is good, relatively good, so you know it, you can, and so on, you can start to create another form, which is the connection of all these elements. Of course, that you see. This form doesn't exist. That exists in the paper. You have to connect like them. It doesn't even exist in the mind because it depends. Generally, everybody creates its own form or its own forms because everybody has an approach of this music depending on the familiarity, the skill, the knowledge, the curiosity, and so on, which is different. But I believe that even a very surface level, something similar may happen. Maybe not verifiable on scientific terms, but for me, musically, it's a very strong say motivation. And then I said, if it is like that, why not using this idea of having a cognitive form, something that you learn as an object, I mean, as a object of the mind, an objet mental, I would say, Changeux, and then objet neuronal, Jean-Pierre Changeux, a well-famous neurologist in France. And then they say, why not take it like this and use it, orchestrating not the piece itself, but the reception you got of the piece. Here is the example. Let's say it's maybe more clear. I took again another miniature that's called Moai, which is a set of accents that are separated by moments where the piano has to continue the sound, so either new chords pianissimo or repeated sounds. Unfortunately, the piano, when it goes away, and if the form gives you that there are two accents spaced out by 20 seconds, you have to fill up the time, otherwise it becomes too boring, especially if it's the beginning of the piece, at least for me. So, so each time I try to take one of these elements, analyze it as an object and not just an element, and orchestrate the object, not the element, which is, of course, in terms of classical pure orchestration, terrible. But let's hear the example. The beginning of the piano, a simple impact. Very virtual impact. This is my fault. This is not, sorry. It was not the fault of PowerPoint. Voilà. The orchestral version of the impact. You laugh, but here I have a screen that is so big. So it's not that, it needs half a millimeter. Voilà. No, good point.
If you just click on the icon.
Thank you.
No?
Thank you. You remember already I will be faster now, we'll double click on the icon. Then a more complex impact, so more different and further away. Now here, for an immediate perception, it's already quite far. But one hears the 3 points loud at the beginning, but it's much longer, the same color of resonance in the middle, the same point at the end. But of course, we're further away. And in this piece, I tried to orchestrate only, since it's a cognitive synthesizer, a cognitive form. There is a form that at the moment lands on one of these, let's say, small digressions that I mentioned about, that I call a structural bridge, and a cognitive pointer, actually, or sorry, it's the same. Depends on which perspective, compositive or cognitive, and then I go from there somewhere else in the orchestra, in the pieces of piano pieces, of course not. The structure, the cognitive bridge I used in this piece is this one. the one from the Berceuse, from the Nina Nana. And the way they became in the orchestra, slow down 1 octave higher. Just the way, so it's very far from, but it's there. And I may propose to just compare rapidly. So we hear the first 2 lines of Moai, we hear the first 2 lines of Moai version, orchestral version, just to see what it means to start with the first impact, to see until how far you go and how far you go in the recognition of the piece and in linking like that. The first time, probably not very far. Try to listen cognitively, that is, find the impacts. 1 impact, very long time. 2nd. 3rd, close. With repetitions. More complex resonance. Crescendo. And the double E, ping, pam, pam, like this. Same with the orchestra. First. With repetition. Crescendo. Until the second last impact is double, right? So I mean, it's not easy, but the music is extremely complex. It's very rich of color, thousands of elements. You can hold your attention on whatever element you want. But nevertheless, if one learns to listen morphologically, then some of the, let's say, pillars, at least, of the cognitive form come out. Let's say, of course, the orchestra cannot be the computer's images. Because if the orchestra can do it, I want to do it the same with the computer. I mean, can't accept to be just left alone. So I try to do the same, to see what it means to do the same thing as with the computer. It means you start with a sound. You do a spectral analysis of the sound and segmentation. You do, it depends how long and how much you need. Then you go out of the sound world, or you sculpt if you want, into an abstracted world, a symbolic world. This is a structure that exists in Chrome. It's called a model. So it holds only the essential symbolic information. So the essential information not in the meaning of, necessarily in the meaning of the loudest things but the one you want as a composer. You are the person who is controlling that. Since you are in the symbolic world, you have CAO and handmade rules, whatever you want to the data. Then you go back to from the data to the primitive objects of Chroma, to the virtual synthesizer, and to the real synthesizer, and see what comes out of that. We will see that in a very simple thing, which is for a piece for voices and electronic, which is the simulation of, this is a sound that doesn't want to work, so I will go out to these two, and that simulates a crescendo of a toaca, which is a Romanian bell, a wooden Romanian bell. So the crescendo, it's a very, as you see, it looks quite close if you do from far. Actually, it looks almost the same, to tell you the truth. So I don't know if this is the right crescendo, but I want to play the crescendo here. Not easy to be able to find, even for a trained Occidental musician, to be able to keep a crescendo constant and a accelerando constant over 1 minute and 20 seconds, regular. It's a very, very tricky thing. There is a noise, okay, from the computer. Remarkable. So I came here to McGill to learn that there exist these kind of things. But it can help a lot if you're working with sound now. And so here the way very simply I use it. I did exactly what I said. I did an audio sculpt marking and a segmentation. Simply that in a sound like this, audio sculpt sometimes is not so good. So the data are sometimes faulty, especially when it goes very fast, very far. It's difficult to recognize all the attacks when the sound is going so fast. But compositionally, I found it more interesting. Then there are holes in the sound, but the tempo is going faster. There were analysis data coming from spectral sequences, so core sequences of this data. These core sequences were used as fundamental frequency, as a spectrum done by a group of sampled voices. So the fundamental frequency of each of the partials, of course, were used as fundamental of a group of recorded, stored voices, sung voices. These sung voices were following, of course, the accelerando. These sung voices were becoming more and more like bells. So when the piece was going on, the sound sounded more and more like a bell. And there are 4 like this. Each 4 divided the spectrum into different ranges, and each range was occupied by a voice. I play for you here only 2 excerpts of 2 voices because it's too much. This is the low voice, the bass voice, and during the progression, of course, the band of choice was moving, so it was doing like this. So here is the bass in a slow at the beginning and in a faster towards the end part of this toaca. And the fast, you see the sonogram of the fast. That's fast in the thing. This is a small part. The same thing applies to the tenor, to the contralto, and to the soprano. Expert of the same control data as before. You see, it's quite hard, quite bell-like. Because it's missing something, you need the same thing, but with purely additive synthesis. Just to verify that the things are together. Who knows, maybe I'm just cheating, right? And I superpose one voice, I think it's a soprano, with the toaka that is not used, it's not heard during the piece, but it's not used, and here is the result. You see, because it is a spectral data that are mapped on the voice, it follows also the spectral contour. The accents are more or less respect marks do correspond to usually richer or louder spectra, and so on. But of course, no feeling of educating anybody. It's not a demonstration of transcription. It's just an aesthetic and musical poetics that builds up out of these elements. What is the end? What is the most important thing? Here is the beginning of the piece, where this happens. There is darkness in the hall, and then starts the electronics. The singers come in later in the darkness. It's quite clear that the relations with the original model. In the end, the last point I want to evoke is another concept of space that changes the relationship that is usually associated to space. The Odyssey is in the middle of a virtually continuous space, materialized by some loudspeakers that are just there as a support. The more they are, the better they are, with some geometrical constraints. To go back to a space as something different, as one loudspeaker, but it's made of several on the stage. There is no thing in the audience. But it's made of several loudspeakers. There was a previous research at IRCAM done on LATIME, which is a direct varying radiation controller, a loudspeaker where you control or create simple first, second, third order radiating harmonics. But I mean, it's not but it's very interesting. But the idea for the composer is nice. It's also musically nice, because then there is an object on stage that usually takes a place where there is a soloist. So just inverse visually the relations. It says, yeah, look, you normally have the soloist here, that I have a big thing of loudspeakers that stays there, where all the music comes out from. There's nothing else around. And then because this is usually quite big, you need a size for the basses, even if there is a subwoofer. And then the player can place itself around that. And this is a first version. It's called what we call a simplified TMA. So it's a loudspeaker that allows to control first and second order spatial harmonics, so dipole and bit cardioid and omni. And then the radiation is the way the sound is thrown out in the hall. And then in the beginning, I wanted to have the feeling, I looked for sounds in the saxophone. This is a rehearsal in Japan where the piece was premiered in Shizuoka, where the saxophonist was just there on the border of zero, right? You have a microphone very near, there's no problem of feedback, I just turn off the loudspeaker behind him, the rest can go, or it's anyway in front of him, no problem of feedback, he can play as softly as that and nevertheless be heard. These sounds are processed through a quite elaborate spectral delay mixed with synthetic sounds and create a very strange, a bit Nonian perhaps, atmosphere to the beginning of this piece. This is a part, there is a solo part, a solo electronic part that I skip. There is a part where the electronic ends and the saxophone starts in. You see, in this idea, he's hidden behind this big block of loudspeakers. He's not seen, but you see the light, so people know that there is somebody behind, but don't see him. And then this source, it's a source, it's a controllable source of sound, becomes like the prolongation, amplification, magnification of his simple pavilion, of the saxophone. In other parts of this piece, there are other positions and create other relationships. And finally, what I found and I thought it was called acoustic totem is what I'm using now for the latest piece that I composed, violin and electronics, and also for the piece I'm composing now, which is an opera on which I'm working, and which is a totally simple, absolutely banal quadraphonic system, but collapsed into one place. So you have 4 loudspeakers, you think quadraphonic, but one is direction of the audience, and then 90 degrees each other until the last one. So by having 1, 2, 3, 4 on this, you have a loudspeaker that changes, that moves around and excites when it turns back the stage, and goes back. When we played it in a good condition, because of course there you activate the acoustical quality of the scene. Very often in the other direction of the space, you prefer that the audience, that the hall is as neutral as possible, so that you create the whole space. Ideally would be open air concert. Here, on the contrary, you want the hall to be as good as possible acoustically, because you are exciting, you are profiting from the acoustics. And it was performed at IRCAM. I saw that there were many people who were sitting in the hall and they were looking around to understand where the sound was coming from, because they thought it was only from there, but they thought because it was reading the program, but they heard it from there, and they heard it from there. There were other loudspeakers for other pieces in the classical setup. So they were quite puzzled by, and the perception is puzzling, because when the sound turns, of course it changed the radiation, so you don't hear me the same way like this, and so on. So you hear this effect of speaking on turning around. And but by doing like that, you make actually the scene play, the volume of the scene play, which of course a very theatrical effect for an opera. And you see the version, the testing version at IRCAM on the left, the real one we use. We try to make a column with the older setup, but it didn't work. It made the sound less clear, and it didn't bring anything to the height. More than 4, you need a special insurance for pillars that are too high. So it's not recommended, especially for a solo piece. But for the opera, I will use 8, but they will be hanged. Of course, they'll come out and be like a big totem in the thing. Totem because it's not only because it's a pillar, I would say it's an acoustic pillar or column, but because of the kind of, say, it's a very special atmosphere. That's all I can say. It fills the space in a very strange way. So there is no way to record it at the moment, at least unless you put, I don't know, a dummy head or whatever it is, which you do not have. So the recording you have it's a small excerpt from one movement for the third movement. That was 1 minute, just to have an idea. The space was span 1, 2, 3, 4, which of course is terrible because you hear what comes like this, it hear like this. And when it jumps from left to right, suddenly, it's very different when it jumps from down, let's say, 2.5 meters, 45 degrees, to up 90 degrees, 0 degrees. That's okay. But when it jumps like this, so it doesn't work. But you have an idea of the sounds, and unfortunately, like all the recordings done by radios that got the direct signal, the violin is too loud because they don't understand that that the electronics may be sometimes, at least in what I do, as important, if not more, in this piece as the violin, the ego of the violinist herself, let's say, and of the performer. And so I beg your acoustic pardon for this very, very banal version, but I mean, you have an idea. This in the piece is a moment where it's where you turn the role. The interpret, the natural interpret, the acoustic instrument creates. Alimentates, gives something to eat at the machine. And the machine is a big machine that rolls sounds around and so on, with spectral delays, with several spectral delays crossing, doing glissandos and so on. Sound with zero, you will hear it's quite a big. And each time there is this impact of the violin complex as a phrase that arises a moment of the electronics alone, and then at my sign starts again and again and again. There are very, very short excerpts. Okay, so you see it's Chantal is an hour. I have an hour, 3 minutes and 17 seconds because of the incident with the filter, which is, but that really relieved my cognitive listening through this. So thank you very much, Stephen. And that's more or less where I am now. I must say just one thing. I of course, I use a lot of terms very, very vaguely, sometimes maybe inappropriately, if seen in a certain context. This is because I gave the priority to presenting a lot of issues, a lot of points where to go to, rather than getting into one point and going down until I found, maybe to find that it was wrong. And but each of these points need to be delved in more in detail, and some of them were done. For example, for the cognitive form, I'm still working on it. I still have to formalize it a bit better. There will be, in some times, an article like the one on the organism and so on, talking about cognitive forms in Beethoven's music, for example. For sure, a third symphony I will use. But nevertheless, I prefer this bit survey of different possible things that makes the life of the composer very full. The day also very full, but very, very satisfactory, because at least for me, I realize more and more. I look backwards and I see with moments like this one, where you are forced to going backwards to things I haven't heard of for years or tens of years. And you see that things get together. This synthesis and instrumental music have often been opposed. Electroacoustic music, that is working with sound, à la Schaffer, spectromorphological music, and synthetic music that have also been opposed. They're actually part of the same domain. In complex synthesis control, you run into electroacoustical problem. You can't, because even if you have the control on each the single detail of your data, the cognitive result is not that. It's useless in a sound that does 3,000 oscillators if you change one. You can't change one, but it doesn't make any sense to the perception, unless you make a radical change. So I mean, complex control has morphological problems of perception that are not the same as simply creating a sound and testing if this parameter works or not, fuses or doesn't fuse, or whatever it is, or is masked or not. And on the other hand, from the electroacoustic music side, such morphological side, there are nowadays especially treatments and things that can go quite down till the sound, to the point that it's hard to make this, say, borders between synthesis and treatment. That I put that at the beginning just for reasons of convenience, and also because it corresponds to my own personal experience. And I'm talking about this experience, not about the universal electronic music. And especially for me, what is very important is the relationship between synthesis and orchestra. It's not a matter that the synthesis has to go in the orchestra in this way. In this case, you just simulate with the orchestra the rules of the synthesis. And the things, to my experience, to my point, don't work so well, because the two walls have their own rules, have their own walls, and they don't belong to the same things. But if from the synthesis you go up to the consequences, to the reasons in technical terms that led you to do that, and the same reason can be translated to another kind of reasons that then are applied to the orchestra. I would have never had the idea of an orchestra as a cognitive orchestrator, and if I have stated that but which spectrum goes to which spectrum, which point goes to downtown. I have to go up, down, and go in the mountains, and then go back to the other path. It's the same process. I bring the same elements, but then I adapt them to that. And David Martin, his very famous book Vision, pointed to that, and for me it's very interesting. He said every layer of the reality, from the infra-small to the super large, of course it's communicating with all the others. That's no problem about it. But all you have also local rules that activate at it, that make sense only at this level. Learning to master these local rules, while at the same time keeping an eye on the upper part, so holding at the same time the global thing and the detail, is what synthesis allows you. It's very hard as a cognitive task, but it's fascinating. So I think I should stop now and ask if there are questions or comments, remarks, for sure.
Thank you so much.